I call Simon O'Connor.
Mr Speaker, I'm very pleased to speak in the second reading on the Judicature Modernisation Bill. As I begin, I need to give a shout out, if you will, to Ethan up in my electorate. I like to think of myself as a responsive MP, and while I don't want everyone starting to message and tweet me for a shout out to young Ethan, who I know is a very keen follower of Parliament, hello to him. Indeed, look, we've got cross-party support going on here, Ethan, even from the Greens. So, Mr Speaker, very pleased to hear New Zealand First's support. I note from a number of speakers across from other opposition parties there are elements of concern, and I think it's right, proper and appropriate they're being voiced here in a second reading. And of course, through this rather weighty document in front of me. I must admit, Mr Speaker, I have not sat on this particular committee. It's something I've been interested in following, though. This is quite a tome, and a number of people have spoken to it in different ways. I think what it does, at least symbolically by its sheer size and weight, other than removing the need to go for the gym by just lifting it, is how serious our judiciary is and the systems within it. What is being discussed here today is serious and has some rather profound impacts on how we as a country move forward. It's reviewing, Mr Speaker, a previous act from 1908, 107 years ago. I don't think anyone can claim from this House to have been around then, but 1908 was when this Act first came about, and this Omnibus Bill seeks to review it. I, out of interest, noted that in 1908, I believe, Shackleton headed to the Antarctic. I think it was either called the Nimrod exhibition or his ship was called Nimrod, but that's something that happened in 1908. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid were killed in 1908. For the feminists amongst us, Simone de Beauvoir was born that year, and for some reason which I still haven't worked out, the King of Portugal was killed in that year. I don't know why I have that in my head, but it just begins to show you the context of why this bill was needed and has reached here today. This sits within a government commitment to modernise the bill. A previous Minister of Courts began a lot of work in this space, updating and modernising, particularly through the use of audio-visual technologies. And this bill plays into that, in some ways could be inspired from it. I know Minister Collins, or then Minister Collins, was a big proponent of bringing this bill before the House, and now sits within the very capable hands of Amy Adams. The bill itself has gone through several iterations in terms of the Select Committee. Scott Simpson was the chair, very fine member for Coromandel when he started to introduce and bring this bill through the House in his capacity, and more recently it's moved on to Jackie Dean, and was very pleased to hear her speak soon after the first speech from the opposition earlier. The bill, as I was saying, is about modernising our courts. This is not something we should rush into quickly, or in fact even often. Some of us, and myself included, have noted it is 107 years since this bill first was the Act itself, which we're looking to amend and modernise, came about. And in some ways I think that illustrates how the rule of law, the structure of law in the realm of New Zealand has worked, and worked rather well, has served us well, but the Parliament has rightly decided now is the time to look and to modernise. But as I just said a bit earlier, this is not something we need to race or rush into. I think we move, if you excuse the pun, judiciously. I've been waiting on that all night. This is an omnibus bill, though. It was noted earlier, but I think it is helpful that we are going to break down this rather large tome into a series of parts and individual bills. Part 1 is going to be around the Senior Courts Bill, and it's going to include Schedule 1 I see here, which is around High Court rules. Part 2 is to be around the District Court Bill, or will be called the District Court Bill, rather self-explanatory. Part 3 of this Judicature Modernisation Bill will become the Judicial Review Procedure Bill. Part 4 again, as you can understand, particularly at home, this is a substantial bill, an omnibus bill, but Part 4 becomes the interest on money claims bill. And we heard from the previous speaker from New Zealand First some thoughts and concerns. I think $5,000 has been the day minimum that has been set. Obviously, the committee has widely discussed this, battered it back and forth, but still obviously an issue that it's been raised here in the House on a second reading. Part 5 is looking and will be called the Electronic Courts and Tribunals Act, with Part 6 basically becoming on top of this 17 separate bills, because they are amending those in 17 respective acts. And 3 statutes are to be repealed: the more recent Supreme Court Act of 2003, obviously the Judicature Act of 1908, and also I note here the Unconsolidated Judicature Amendment Act of 1972, and finally the District Court Act of 1947. This is an enormous piece of work, and I think it's right to commend not only the MPs through the Select Committee that have worked on this, but the ministers and their officials. This is a lengthy and substantial piece of work, and kudos to whoever has read from page 1 through, I think it was 1200 and something. It is a substantial piece of work. Mr. Speaker, there has been raised by several members, particularly within the Labour Party, and articulated quite well and succinctly in their minority report around the purpose. If I can just jump, I think it was page 7. They were very concerned that, to quote, that concepts which they believe comprise the fundamental values in New Zealand's justice system, such as the rule of law, judicial independence, the Treaty of Waitangi, and parliamentary sovereignty, were not put in as purposes of the clause, as in not put in the purposes clause. I must say I agree that it's not in the purpose clause for a number of reasons. I think the Minister in her opening address noted that this is an application, if you will, of those principles, all of them incredibly important. I don't think anyone would, well, I hope no one in the House would disagree that elements such as parliamentary sovereignty, the rule of law, the Treaty of Waitangi, and judicial independence are important. But this bill itself is not there to express those purposes by defining them. It's there to do it through its actions. The other side, if I was to put on a philosophical hat, is that you can't really have a purpose to commit. I don't really think it makes so much sense. And so when we do see in the minority review, it says, look, the first omission that the opposition sees is that the purposes clause 3, should have a reference to a commitment to parliamentary sovereignty. It's not, again, you can't quite have a purpose to commit. You can have a purpose to bring about, you can have a purpose to express a duty, but I think we do a disservice actually to the elements of the treaty, principles of the rule of law, by just simply throwing them in as a purpose. The other element which comes in is always around clarity with these things. They're wonderful notions, and many of us, depending on what you've studied through law, philosophy, whatever, these are quite, some of them can be rather well debated elements. People's perception of some of these purposes or intended purposes is still open to debate. And I think we as a House do ourselves a disservice if we try to almost poetically throw them in because it sounds good and it's got high moral tones without fully understanding what they mean and being able to clearly articulate them. And ultimately, when you are dealing with a bill such as this one, it is vitally important that we get the minutiae right, and the best way to start getting things right is to be precise with one's language and precise with one's understanding. So I just want to, I suppose, push back on that notion. I can understand, I think, the ideas of where it might come from, but it's not right, appropriate, or even good lawmaking that we would insert those 4 elements into this bill. In fact, this bill, when it becomes an act and rightly and justly applied, will bring about those purposes coincidentally, but it does not need an explicit note. I'm conscious the bell has gone, which means there's only a short time to go. I do want to just draw attention to the whole use of the audio-visual links. Again, a former Minister of Courts in particular championed a lot of this work, as well as the whole use of electronic paperwork. This bill draws that right across the judicial system. I think it's fantastic that those of the courts will be able to submit electronically, and we heard today from the Minister of Correction, Sam Lotawinga, I think it was about a 10.6 million spend that the government's put out across 12 prisons to increase the audio-visual capacity there. Again, if memory serves me right, something like 40,000 remand hearings have been heard. I think it's important for us to understand that certain hearings will always require, I think, that a citizen, someone accused, can stand and face to face, in actuality, their accuser. But things like bail hearings, remand can easily be done audio-visually. So that is my not somewhat short contribution, but I do commend the bill to the House.